Greetings, I'm Pastor Dave, and these are our weekly Bible stories for the season of Lent. And so thank you for joining us. We are recording these today at Detroit Methodist because all of the congregations at Bright Star are important and all their communities are important. The season of Lent is where we think about Jesus and his crucifixion. His sacrifice on the cross and turning his attention towards that. And so we've been focused on that these last few sessions. We'd spoken just the last session about the Passover celebration and how Jesus turned that into the Last Supper, and then we've turned that into communion. Just before Jesus was celebrating the communion or the Last Supper, he washed his disciples' feet, and so this would be that passage taken out of John 13, 1 through 17. But again, I'm reading out of the Children's Bible, and it's a paraphrase of that. It was nearly time for the Passover feast, and a kind man had set aside a room for the disciples to prepare for it. That night, as they were eating, Jesus left the table. He wrapped a towel around his waist, filled the basin with water, and then kneeling on the floor, he began to wash and dry the disciples' feet like a servant. The disciples were speechless. But when he knelt before Simon Peter, Peter protested, "Lord, you must not wash my feet." But Jesus replied gently, "You do not understand what I'm doing, but later it will be clear to you. Unless I wash you, you won't really belong to me." And then Peter begged him to wash his hands and his head too. And Jesus answered, "If you have bathed, then I have only need to wash your feet. Your body is clean." Jesus had washed their feet like a servant so that they would learn to do the same for one another. That would be the story of the foot washing.
Okay, Pastor. I've been on a few mission trips, and we have done foot washing ceremonies. But in real life, a lot of us aren't ever going to wash anybody's feet. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling there's more to foot washing than foot washing.
Yeah, it's probably true. When we do mission trips with YouthWorks, one of their closing sessions is for a foot washing. They have a space for that. And for anybody who's been on a mission trip, and particularly, now that I've been in a few of them, at least emotionally, I kind of been prepared for it, and so I kind of expect it. But I think initially, the first time I did that, it was really touching and really kind of powerful. And I think because of the symbolism, because of the idea of servanthood and what that means, that Jesus had consistently used what we might call upside down thinking. I sometimes use that phrase where he says, if you want to lead people, you got to serve them. And then to demonstrate that then as an object lesson, he washed their feet. Typically in the ancient world, that's what servants did that, slaves did that. They washed people's feet. And Jesus said, if you want to be a leader, then you have to serve. That is probably a theme that I try to think about as I lead the Bright Star Parish. That, I guess that question is, what gives you the right to run things around here? It's nobody literally asks that, but what gives you the right to do that? And I think our human response is, well, because I'm smart. Our human response is because I'm so handsome, or because I'm hardworking.
I've put in my time.
I put in my time. I've done this. I have seniority. Whatever it is that we. But I think from the perspective of Jesus, he would say, no, the reason that you get to lead is because you serve. We use that phrase sometimes. We talk about public servants. The word there's a phrase that we don't use it in our government, but they use it in England. You have the Prime Minister, and you have a Minister of Parliament. A minister is literally, and I'm a minister, sometimes people call me, it's a ministry, right? It means literally to serve. That's what it means. And so to minister to someone is to serve them. And so the notion kind of embodied there is that if you're a public servant, if you're leading, then you do that by serving. It's kind of embodied. Now, sometimes we forget that. Sometimes preachers forget that. Ministers do. And I suppose sometimes public servants forget that. But that being said, I think those are all of those harken back to that idea of Jesus where he says, if you're going to lead people, you have to serve them. And so the answer to the question, well, it gives you the right. Well, it gives me the right is because I serve. That the point of leading is ultimately giving. I mean, we kind of know that from our own families. What is it that parents do? And again, why do parents get to lead? Well, parents get to lead their children because they're smart, because they're good looking, they don't get. I mean, in that sense, it's not something that you don't take a test for it. It's not a prize that you win. It's a responsibility you're given. And so how is it that you discharge that responsibility? And you discharge it by giving. You sacrifice for your kids. And so I think we know that kind of in our family lives. But then when we get to other contexts, we think, well, no, there's a different set of rules. But I think Jesus is kind of saying, no, the way that you lead is by giving, is by serving. And he does that by acting as if he were a slave. The thing that is touching, I suppose, about foot washing is the fact that it is probably more humbling to receive it than to give it, right? I mean, and that's really Peter's response, but I think it probably, quite honestly, is our response. When you have other people washing your feet, you kind of go, ooh, it's intimate, and it is, well, again, humbling. Is that, here's somebody who should be in charge of me, but they're serving me, and in a very obvious way. And that is, but I think the point of that humility then is to engender in us. I mean, why did Jesus do that? And the answer is Jesus did that so that we could do it with one another, right? I mean, I can, if he does it with me, then I can do it with other people. And so ultimately that is, I think, what is it ultimately that transforms human relationships? And I would argue that it is that kind of humble service, that it is grace, forgiveness. That's what transforms human relationships. We are tempted to think that me teaching somebody a lesson, revenge, is what's going to change relationships, but it doesn't. It just makes people who are already madder. All right, so it doesn't really an eye for an eye and makes the whole world blind kind of thing. So that doesn't really change things. People being impressed with me doesn't really change things. What changes things ultimately is that kind of grace and forgiveness, humility. I think that probably has more power to transform relationships than anything else. But ironically, it's the last thing we go to. We try everything else, and then we say, well, I give up, and I'll be humble. Humble because I don't have any other solutions. And I think that is, again, kind of the consistent witness of Scripture is, then that means God can work when my solutions run out. And so when my whatever intelligence or hard work or money or power or all those things that I use to try to make things change, when those things fail, then I depend on God to change things, and they change.
God has a funny way of doing that. All right. Thanks, Pastor.